Have you ever had to deploy a server and then install some application with a specific version, and then maybe later you had to update it or whatever the case may be? Well, that's because values typically change. Like, applications are never static. There's always updates, there's always environment variables. Things need to be embedded or injected into an application based on if it's running in dev, staging, production, if it's getting updated, all that. There are plenty of variables that kind of go along with this. Now, in the Kubernetes world, the way that we solve this is with ConfigMaps. So now imagine if you had a container image and every single time you had to do something with that container image, a new version, passing in an environment variable, some configuration data, like a username, whatever the case may be. If you had to do that and then, redeploy or recreate or update, change, modify that container image every single time for a little tweak based on the environment, that would be pretty cumbersome and it's not efficient. So that's where ConfigMaps come into play, and ConfigMaps in Kubernetes are key value stores. Literally, it's just, you have your key and then you have your value. Same thing with like a dictionary in Python, for example, or a hash table in other programming languages. Now, one thing to keep in note here, and we're going to dive into the hands-on piece of this, don't worry. We're going to look at standalone Kubernetes with ConfigMaps, and then we're going to look at how to manage them in Portainer. But one very, very important thing before we move on. ConfigMaps are not meant for secrets. So if you have a password or an API key or something like that you don't want in plain text, you don't want to use a config map. Config maps are for anything that you are okay with that's in plain text. So for example, a username maybe or something like that. All right, so with that being said, let's jump into the hands-on piece of this, and we're going to see how to deploy standalone and with Portainer. Let's jump right in. All right, so first things first, let me zoom in a bit here and we'll take a look at what a config map looks like. Now, this is the declarative method of deploying a config map. If you wanted to, let me just clear my screen here, you could run kubectl create config map and then pass in some information. So if I do the -h there, we can see some examples here. So like kubectl create config map and then the name, and then you can call either from a file or you can do from literal. So you can, literally put your key and then your value there. Now that's more of an imperative method, and we're definitely going to want to stick to the declarative method with the Kubernetes manifest. So as you can see here, I'm using the config map resource. It's coming from the core API group. I'm giving it a name, and then I'm specifying the data, aka the key value pair. So the key is username, the value is Mike. Now, how can I utilize this? Well, if I wanted to, here's a Kubernetes manifest here. It's just deploying an Nginx deployment. And if I scroll down on line 18, we can see where the environment is getting set up, the environment variables. And then I'm saying value from config map keyref. And I'm specifying the name of the config map and the key. All right, and if we match that up, we can see Nginx config map, and then the key is username. Same thing that we're seeing right here. Now, if I wanted to, I could run kubectl create -f map.yaml. All right, now it's created. I could run kubectl get config map or cm. We can see that right here. And then I could run kubectl create -f nginx.yaml, and that's created. Now, if I just run kubectl get pods, and then if I copy the pod here and I run kubectl describe pod, if I go ahead and if I scroll up a little bit, we can see here that I'm specifying in the environment the Nginx config for our key map. Now that's how you would do it without Portainer. Let's go ahead and take a look at how you would do it with Portainer. All right, so I'm in Portainer here, and I'm just going to choose one of my Kubernetes clusters, and then I'm going to go to config maps and secrets, and then I'll go ahead and I'll create one with the form. I'll give it a name, Nginx config 01. Specify the default namespace, and then I'll literally just put in the key and the value, username Mike, and I'll click create, and that's it. So Portainer definitely makes this process easier, and if you don't want to use YAML, you don't have to. Now, if you want to use YAML, you could just create from manifest and point to your repository, or even use the web editor. So I could use the web editor, for example, go to VS Code, I could copy this config map and paste it in right here. 02, give it a name, Nginx 01 config map, and click deploy. So you have a few different options here. You could either do it with the UI, or you could do it with the form. And that's how you can manage config maps inside of Portainer and outside of Portainer with standalone Kubernetes. Thank you so much for watching.